Hello everyone, and welcome to week 4 of Curriculum and Pedagogy 2, Planning. This is the second week of your discipline-specific offerings, and this week we are going to look at the second strand from the Australian curriculum, Geographical Inquiry and Skills. Geographical inquiry is the method used to underpin any type of lesson plan, lesson sequence or unit plan within geography. First of all, we'll look at the inquiry method as an effective way for teaching and learning in geography. Many different writers over many years have put forward different ways of thinking about inquiry, so we will look at that first before delving into what inquiry looks like in the Australian curriculum, and then we will look at how you can structure an effective inquiry process before looking at a few examples. So what does the word inquiry mean? The first thing you'll notice from this slide is that there are two spellings for the word inquiry, one with an E and one with an I. Margaret Roberts, an influential geographer from the UK, has found that there's no real differences between the two words. In the UK, inquiry with an E is used more commonly, whereas here and in America, we tend to use the I version. As can be seen from the dictionary definitions, inquiry is all about questioning. But as can be seen on the next slide, there is no overall consensus on its meaning or definition. But what is agreed upon is that it is an active approach to learning geography, which encourages pupils to ask questions about real issues, to search for answers using a wide range of skills and information, and to think critically about issues rather than accept passively the conclusions, research, and opinion of others. That definition came from the Geography Association in 2009. However, if we go back to the words of Roberts, she reminds us that it is something that we don't really have to be definitive about, as it changes from one school to the next depending on the context. And her quote is on the right-hand side of the slide. This is how ACARA define inquiry in the Australian curriculum. Geographical inquiry is the process by which students learn and deepen their understanding. It involves individual or group investigations that start with geographical questions and proceed through the collection, evaluation, analysis, and interpretation of information to the development of conclusions and proposals for actions. Inquiries may vary in scale and geographical context. There is an old saying that reads, "Tell me and I forget. Show me and I might remember, involve me and I will understand." And this is really what inquiry is all about, getting involved. So in the Australian curriculum, the inquiry method looks like this, the 5 dot points: observing, questioning, planning, collecting, recording, evaluating, representing, interpreting, analysing and concluding, communicating, and lastly, reflecting and responding. However, we probably should not represent it like that because it is not a linear process, but jumps around, doesn't necessarily go in order, and indeed parts can be repeated. So perhaps this is a better representation of what the inquiry method should look like in a geography classroom. This slide shows a framework for learning through inquiry from Margaret Roberts from 2003. And the slide after this shows how she changed her model in 2013. And what I'm going to let you do is let you flick back and forward to see if you can spot what the differences are between what she said in 2003 and then this is what she said in 2013. The first thing you will notice is that the arrows are gone, suggesting that the elements do not occur in any sequence but can happen at any stage of the process. But in general, there are similarities. The first box in both are about getting students curious. Sometimes we refer to this as hooks, hooking the students in so that they want to learn, things that they want to know, something that is going to spark their imagination and maintain their interest. How are you going to do that as a teacher? By questioning always. Have you already come across any teaching and learning strategies that will allow you to perform this in your classroom? The second box, let's just flick back. So it's about using data in this one. Second box is at the bottom corner, bottom left-hand corner in this second slide. But what you can see is that both boxes are all about evidence. These could be secondary sources that you could get, or it could be about getting primary data. And getting primary data means that you actually collect the data yourself. So it might be about going on a field trip. Students love field work, so take them out when you can. It also helps to build your relationship with them. The third box, flicking back again, making sense in this one, and in the top right hand side, in this one, you can see that both boxes are about making sense of information. The fourth box for both of them is all about reflection. But what you have to remember is that this is not a linear process, but becomes extremely iterative the deeper you go into inquiry. So what you can see from this model is that it aligns with what has been put forward in the Australian curriculum, which you will see on the next slide. And there are your different parts or elements of the Australian curriculum mapped on top of Roberts' 2013 model. There are lots of different inquiry models, but they all basically say the same thing. Here is another popular one. This one is from Victoria. What you can see are the different levels of questions that you can generate, which can be used as a method for catering for the various abilities in your class. Catering for various abilities is known as differentiation, or using quality differentiated teaching practices, which is something that you will look at in subsequent curriculum units. Take time and study the questions here, where you can see you go from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. So lower order, what and where, how and why. And then if you go to the right hand side, there's more higher order processes. What are the main issues and problems being studied? What is their scale? What patterns of distribution are there? So that you can see the higher order questions are more complex. And you can use this as a method of differentiation in your classroom. Here is a worked example of how this framework can be applied to one of the Year 7 topics, water in the world. And as you can see, there are different levels of questioning which can be applied throughout the unit. So take time and go through this slide and see the more complex the questions get as you go into the higher order thinking processes. So this slide, take time to read it. And this slide, take time to read that as well. I'm going to take the different elements from the Australian curriculum and show you how I might build up my inquiry looking at the topic of coastal erosion on the Gold Coast. So my simple questions might be, what is coastal erosion? Where is coastal erosion happening on the Gold Coast? What are the causes of coastal erosion? What are the impacts of coastal erosion on communities and the environment? How are the impacts being managed? Are there better ways to manage the impacts? What else could we do? And then, of course, you must remember back to what we looked at last week, but you must think about those concepts that underpin a geographical way of thinking. So you can see I've mapped some of the concepts down the side that would go with those inquiry questions. So for example, the last one, are there better ways to manage the impacts? What else could be done? That maps very, very easily with the concept of sustainability. So observing and planning, a teaching strategy to find out their existing knowledge. So both the Australian curriculum and Margaret Roberts talk about finding out what students know, getting them curious, hooking them in, and the following is a strategy for finding out their pre-existing knowledge. Sometimes referred to as a KWL chart, or as this one is called, a KWHL-AQ. What do I think I know? How do I want to learn? How do I find out? What have I learned? What action will I take? What new questions do I have? This method could be applied to a single lesson, a sequence of lessons, or indeed a whole unit of work. Another way of getting students interested is by using photographs and asking lots of questions around the photo. Here are some examples. So this one is obviously something to do with coastal erosion. What types of questions would you apply to that photograph? Here is a second one. What types of questions would you apply to that photograph? Continuing through the different stages of inquiry from the Australian curriculum then, the next stage is collecting, recording, evaluating and representing. So this is basically about, okay, we have our questions, where are we going to find our answers? In geography, sources can be primary or secondary, as you can see on the table in front of you. Primary basically means that you get the information firsthand by doing fieldwork, for example, whereas secondary means that you source the information from a book or a website, newspaper article, or something like that. Think of some more examples where you can get reliable information from. And remember, the word is reliable. Think back to EUN 120 when we talked about reliable sources of information. So the next thing you have to think about is how is the information you have collected going to be represented? Let's say you went to the Gold Coast and collected a whole load of data on wave heights. Could you represent the information in a particular way so that it can be analysed more clearly? And here they've used the example of a line graph to show how wave height and energy periods have changed over time. Ask questions, why? What other information might I need? And then to go through the steps of analysis, you would need to describe the patterns, you would need to explain the patterns, you would need to quote data to show what you are talking about. You could manipulate the data, so you could take one figure away from the other, and you could point out the ones that don't quite fit the regular pattern, known as anomalies or outliers or something like that. And from the analysis, you can then draw conclusions and make decisions about a course of action. So if you're trying to prevent coastal erosion from happening again, what actions would you take for the future? Communicating. How are you going to communicate your results? Are you going to do a report? Is it going to be written or visual? You might decide to do a multimodal presentation. So this is the assessment piece that will be attached to your lesson or your lesson sequence. A portfolio, a project book, classroom display, a web page, a letter to an MP, an infographic, or so on. You need to find out if learning has actually happened, and your KWHLA Q chart is a good way of doing this. And then you can think about how you could make your lesson better for the next time around. And then, as I was just talking about, your call to action. And here are some of the coastal management strategies that have happened on the Gold Coast. So you've got some sand dune restoration, you've got a sand pipeline, you've got a big groyne or a seawall, and at Palm Beach, which is one of the areas of the Gold Coast that is most eroded, they have a complete Palm Beach shoreline project in progress. Okay, so that's the inquiry method. It underpins everything that you do in geography. So in conclusion, things that you have to remember: you need to hook students in. What are they interested in? What are they going to ask questions about? How are you going to get them curious? Will it engage them? Will it be meaningful to them and relevant? Is it important to them? Do you give students some choice so that they actually do something that they are interested in? But whatever it is that you are doing, it must focus on the official curriculum document, and you must cover the content descriptors, the concepts, the inquiry method, and the skills. Are you going to be able to find quality resources? What are the school's resources, and how much time will be given towards that lesson? These are all things that you need to consider when you're putting together a lesson in geography. Thank you.